Okay.
Okay, so welcome again to all those that are in attendance. We're going to do something that's going to help us complete the Mimer. The Mimer has 32 oisius, but in this booklet, not the one that is more common that the Rebbe gave out, but this one, they have in the back, what you're going to see on the screen. It's Teichen Yonim. And there are different paragraphs with letters, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, and Vav, but it's not corresponding to the oisius in the Maimon. The Maimon has Lamed Beis oisius. This is just the numbers of the paragraphs in this summary of the whole Maimon. So you have the copy as it's being shown now. I mean, you have the ability to see it on the screen. And we'll go through the Maimon. Everything that's here is in a capsule form. And so a lot of it is elaborated on and explained in the Maimon much, much, much more. But in interest of being able to cover everything, we're going to compromise and sacrifice on the extensive discussion and explanation. So we have a complete thing that eventually everyone will have the chance at some point to learn it in the Sefer and to see it in its complete form, or how it's discussed at length and explained very deeply and beautifully, of course. So let's start from Aleph now. The blue is more like statements. The orange is a question. The yellow is the answer. And the pink is explaining now what we established, the fact, the question, the answer, and then to explain it more, which means once we have the answer, so we now know how to understand it, but we need to understand it better because the very answer itself needs more explaining. So that's basically how I highlighted it, so we have some idea. I skipped the words that I feel would make it easier for us to have a more direct flow and be able to cover the whole thing. I'll explain as much as I can. It's a long mimer, like I said, a lot of explanations, and a lot of it is deep stuff. A lot of it is heavy chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab. This stuff, all this yonim are discussed in other maimorim at length as well. You'll find a lot of these topics, a lot of these subjects, a lot of these ideas that are being mentioned here, discussed and used in many, many maimorim to bring out the points of those maimorim. So you'll forgive me if I can't cover it and explain it in its fullest form. Okay, so we'll start with Aleph. Midian, I'm reading only the highlighted parts. So if you're following with me and you want to know where I'm holding, always look where it's highlighted. Midian, he menaged l'shem havaya, shen yonei hayichud ve'iskalas d'kedusha. What is Shem Havaya? Shem Havaya is Iskalas d'kedusha. We explained it last week, that it's a blend of all different components and elements in Kedusha. And that's what Kedusha is comprised of. Kedusha is comprised of many different various components that are blended together, and it makes up a sphera, and so on. So that's Kedusha. And what is Midian opposing? Shem Havaya. The Midian is the opposition of Shem Havaya. What is Shem Havaya? His scholars, as we'll explain. And Midian, because it's the opposite of Shem Havaya, and Shem Havaya is Achdus, is his scholars. So Midian is Modern Meriva, which is disconnect and separation and opposition and so on. So this Midian, which stands for the exact opposite of what Shem Havaya stands for, is Inyan HaPirud v'Hayischalkus. is, as we just said, modern Meniva means fighting and disputing and contending and so on. And that is what separation and division is all about. And this is not, as he says before, that this is in general. His whole inyan is Peter than his chalkus. So it's not, over here we're going to have to use some of the words I didn't highlight. Shazel klolis ha'inyan, v'loy mida pratis. We explained last week that there is, for some reason, let's say somebody has a particular thing, like a detail within their whole being that doesn't fit with somebody else's whole being because of this detail. For instance, they want to do the same thing, but one wants to choose one kind of way of getting there, and the other one wants to choose a different way of getting there. So they're both united, and they both are in sync with each other. They both have the same goal, they both have the same interest, they both are putting their efforts together to join and to do it together. But now they have some technicality, some detail about it. And so they have to work it out, or even if they can't work it out, it doesn't mean that they're essentially opposing and can't stand each other's guts. As we explained with Yimach Shemoy, that he couldn't stand a Yid, there was nothing external about his not being able to stand a Yid, because if the externals of that Yid was exactly in line, and he wouldn't know, he wouldn't have a way of knowing that it's a Yid, then there wouldn't be a problem, which means he hates a Yid with the extremist form of hatred that could be. The Yid himself, nothing outside, nothing external. And that's basically what we're saying about Midyan. Midyan is hatred. Midyan is divisiveness. Midyan is opposition. And not like the other Svidis in Klippa that have a certain incompatibility. They have a problem with, because they're only a specific expression of Klippa. They're not a general expression of Klippa, which means, in other words, that Klippa itself is all about divisiveness. Now, you could have a part of that divisiveness, or you could have the essence of that divisiveness. Then what is the symbol of the essence of Klippa, which is all about divisiveness? As much, just the same as we say that Kedusha is all about unity, Klippa is the opposite of Kedusha, which is really what it is. That's why it's not a real Metzias, but we won't talk about it now. Klippa is only here to be in opposition, so that's its whole being. Now comes the Rebbe with a question that's going to be presented to be able to explain what we're saying further. So the Rebbe says, it's not really a question as in the minor, the official question, but it's part of the summary. So he continues the flow of the review. Here we have a big problem. We find that when we say that there's Kedusha, especially if we say Yud Kei Vav Kei, and Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Yud is Chochma, the Hey is Bina, the Vav is Chesed, Midos, and so on, and the Hey is Malchus. So we know there's such a thing as Chochma and Kedusha. Not only do we know such a thing as Chochma and Kedusha, we explained, we talked about it last week and the week before, that Chochma is the symbol of Bittul. Chochma is what represents the Bittul of Kedusha. Now Chochma is Seichel, it's part of Seichel. Seichel has three parts, Chochma, Bina, and Das. And now we've just finished saying that the whole inyan of Kedusha is Achdus. So how does it work with Chochma, with Moichin? Moichin meaning including Chochma or any part of Kedusha. There's this Chalkus in Moichin, not only Chochma, by the way, but even Chochma. Any part of Moichin is about specifics, is about details, is about particulars, which means how do we understand something? We understand something through analysis. We understand something through being able to discern what makes this different than the other and why this is what it is and not that. For instance, if you're going to say that 2 plus 2 is 4, you're going to have to conclude that it can't be 3 and it can't be 5. And you're going to have to find a way to pinpoint and to zoom in on what this is as it and not something else. And the only way you can grasp it with your mind is through this analysis, which automatically eliminates, and through deduction, which automatically makes it that it is unique and it is different than others. So how could you say that the whole inyan of Kedusha, which has Meichen in it, the Olamais, the highest of the Olamais is the 10 spheres. The 10 spheres have Meichen and they have Midas. And yet we say that Kedusha is Iskalos. Kedusha is Achtos. How could that be? Says the Rebbe like this. Hareze, the Rebbe Rashab, that is. This is the answer. Hareze, the explanation. Hareze bebina, havana v'hasoga utfisa, hash'enkim b'chochma, she'irak nekuda klolis. It's in bina, which means where do you find differences? Where do you find division? Where do you find separation? When you start examining the details, details by definition means that there are various different things different than each other. In one general concept, there are various different differences. So you're now exposing and revealing differences and boundaries, and you're figuring out how this works and how you can understand it. Says the Rebbe Rashab, no, it's not in Chachma, it's in Bina. But I just finished saying that it's even in Chachma. Here's where the next part comes in, the Oid. So number one, you could say that Chachma is unity. And when we're talking about Shem Havaya, we're talking about Kedusha, we're talking about the highest level in Kedusha. The source of everything else that stems from it is unity, which is Chachma. However, Bina is already when it spreads out. It branches out into separate, different ideas. So the Rebbe Rashab says, and another answer, she's chalkus the chachma tachlisa hu inyan iskalus. She'ein ze is chalkus shel shnei dvarim. She'is chalkus is sibas apirut. And this the ischalkus of chachma is not like the ischalkus of two different things that were never one and they were put together and now they're separated and they're divided. That's when we have a problem with ischalkus. But if we take ischalkus in something that essentially is one, and the only purpose for taking it apart, for dividing it up and breaking it up into parts and different components, is only a part of bringing out Hisachtus. The taking apart, Hischalkus, the dividing it, is for the sake and is because of the Achtus. Zu hi sibas ha'achtus. I just want to complete what I said last week, one more anecdote, and also it's going to help us here. There's so much to explain how really things end up being opposite, but you can see how they're one and they work together and they come from one source. But there's one anecdote that I think will help us. There was this child that had a phobia, had a tremendous fear of being alone without his mother. So he would follow her everywhere around the house, every day, all day long. At night he was afraid, so he would have, he would have anxiety, and he would have to be next to her. By day, he would have to be next to her. And there was a problem. The child also had another problem, a separate problem completely. And that is that when he was in school, he couldn't handle not getting a perfect mark. Let's say the perfect mark would be 100, which is usually the case, but sometimes we have extra credit and all that, but that's for the conversation. 100. and he pushed it. He was oismensch. He couldn't handle not getting on. And so they took him to somebody, to professional psychologist, and the parents explained these two problems that they're experiencing. Two interesting problems that the same person is experiencing. So they're asking to help with these two problems. So the psychologist said they're all one and the same. The reason why he's so connected and so attached to his mother is a fear of not being connected to her, which may have happened because of a reason when he was a baby, and his fear of and his dependency on her is so strong that he doesn't want to upset her with getting lesser than a perfect mark. What do we just do? You could look at it from one point, like on the surface, and you see two separate things. Maybe one thing is about being a perfectionist, and the other one is being very dependent and attached to his mother, for whatever reason, insecurity, whatever else. But if you look more carefully, you see that be'emes, it expresses itself in two separate points, two completely different points. One is that he's following his mother around the house and constantly grabbing her apron and holding on. And if she walks away more than 2 feet, he starts panicking. That's one, which seemingly has nothing to do with the other. And the other one is that he really can't handle that, or lower than perfect. So when we talk about, and this is a very important point, and this is going to be the basis for the rest of the Maimon. When we talk about breaking something up, there's two ways of breaking something up. One is breaking something up that shows how these things lack a certain uniting factor. They now don't share anything because they're separate things, completely independent of the other. But then there's another one where breaking it up is actually driven by the oneness, by the inherent oneness that's in it. And for that, perhaps we could use an analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, for instance, a puzzle in general. So when someone comes and he wants to do the puzzle, just want to see the watch, so I'm just setting up my clock. Okay, I believe I'm going to look 8:45. So if any change, you let me know, please. You take a jigsaw puzzle, you take it out of the box, you scatter it all around, and you mix it up. This is just to help us understand. Now, what happens is you just took a bunch of pieces, let's say a 500-piece puzzle. It's easier if we make it more, extreme. The 500-piece puzzle, you just took it, and you're looking at all the pieces, and what you see is the opposite of unity, the opposite of any connection at all from one to the other. Every piece is different. Every piece has a different design, has a different thing. So now, why is this broken up into so many pieces, though? It's broken up into so many pieces because really it makes up one big picture, and really the oneness about it is what it's all about. That's what it really is. That's its whole concept of a puzzle, is that you're putting it back to what it really should be and what it really was originally. That is what we have to understand. The other side is very easy to understand. You take two people that don't have anything in common, and there's only one thing that's uniting them, which means, in other words, that essentially they're not the same. And the only thing that's holding them together is an outside factor, is an external factor. And now when something divides them, that's like taking away any type of uniting force or uniting factor that's there. So what you see is the truth. What you just did is separated two things where there's no commonality at all between the two of them. There was something there, but once you took that away, now what you see is two separate things that are really separate. So take, for instance, if two enemies, let's say a terrorist and a Yid, and there's a certain factor that's uniting them. They're both trying to save their lives, So they have to work together, and they're running away from a fire or something, and the only way they can get that door, that window open is if they both join forces. Now, everyone understands that these two people are the most opposite that can be. The terrorist is a destructive, beyond any, Midian is beyond any kind of reasoning, any kind of understanding. It's like it's deep, deep inside. He has no mercy on the guy whatsoever. He, in his, at least idealistically, he would destroy this guy, rip him to pieces in the most ugliest fashion possible. And he would love to make him suffer while that's happening to the maximum degree. And this Yid is a Yid. And so they basically are opposite in from the core. And now they're united because of a common goal, but they're not really one. As soon as that common goal goes away, there you go. They're two opposites. They'll be at each other's throats. And so that's the point. Breaking something up into parts is not in itself true division. It could be the opposite. It could be its oneness is what brings out its different variety of various factors, various elements, components, and so on. And that's what the Rebbe Rashad is saying. You could have differences because of Shem Havaya, which is only an expression of the unity, like I said about the puzzle, or you could have differences for the sake of differences because the thing was never really one. And what it goes back to is that Kedusha is really one. And Havaya is an expression of the oneness of Hashem, of how it could even come out into different branch off into different existences and different natures in each thing that exists, how it could be opposite, like fire and water, etc. And just not to get in too much into this, the Rebbe Rashab refers to it a little bit in the Maimon, the difference between Yachid and Echad. And I may have said this last week, but just very briefly, if someone says I get along with everyone because he is completely isolated and removed from any other human beings, he says I never have any fights, is that a proof that he's really a person of unity, that he really has this ability to just blend and be one with everyone? No, it's not a proof at all. It just means that there was never a chance where it was tested. That's why there's no big deal in saying that Hashem's oneness was in the world when on Sunday, when they wished to create the world, the first day, because it was only Yom Echad. It was the day that Yechidah Shel was present, that was revealed, and was what was functioning then openly. What happens if you have two? Then you have another entity, which means the very fact that there's another thing means that it's taking away from my oneness because I'm no longer one. It takes away from the fact that I'm the only one, which means just by it existing the same time that I exist, that is in itself the greatest opposition to me, because it's changing my status from one to not one. Then comes Tuesday, which is Tiferes. And Tiferes brings out how really these two are one and the same. That's the true oneness. So when we say Havaya, which is going to be coming through in the Maimer the whole time, this idea. When we say Havaya, it all depends on where it's coming from and what is causing this expression of variation, of variables. If it's coming from something that's one and it is buckled to that oneness, and now it's something other than something else, even if it looks like it's opposite something else, then it's not really something else. It's just making that oneness even greater. That's why we say Hashem Echad and we don't say Hashem Yachid. Why do we say Hashem Echad? Because the whole idea of the Abrish's oneness is mean that it's even one through all the diversity, through all the variables and all the differences. And there's Echad, there's the Eibishter and Ches and Dalet, which is the four directions and the seven heavens and the earth. That's where the Chiddush is. True that Yachid indicates a stronger oneness, because Yachid means unique, but that's not a kunz. Let's go further. So this is basically what the Rebbe Rashab is saying about this whole business of there being moichin in Kedusha, even though Kedusha is seemingly supposed to be the opposite of Midyan, where there's no divisions and there's no differences, and there's no things that seem to exclude other things, and yet with moichin you need to do that. Says the Rebbe Rashab, two basic answers. One answer is in Chachma. We're talking about Chachma when we say Kedusha, which is because it's brought in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe brings that Kodesh Ha'elyon, Kodesh is Chachma, because that is the essence of Chachma, of Kedusha. Kedusha stems from Chachma. Then you have Kedusha, it's not Kodesh. It's Kodesh Ha'elyon, which is Chachma, that is the essence of Kedusha. So there we see the oneness. That's one answer. Another answer is that we're talking about the division, the separate different entities that exist in Kedusha itself, but we're talking about how they express and therefore and because of they're about the oneness of Kedusha, which is what I just explained at length. Okay, let's go continue inside. We're holding the Ha'inyan. So the pink, basically, I had three colors, so I chose, these are the three colors I had in the highlighters. And actually my blue started running out. As you can see, it's faded lower down the page, but it's not a big deal, right? And so we have now, let's understand this. Let's understand this better. So I already started explaining and giving some examples, but it needs more explaining. What do you mean that you say his chalkas and yet you say achtas? So that needs explaining. But Inyan says, holding by the pink. In everything, hiddenly, we spoke about this last week, there's also its opposite. Hidden, concealed. That means you might see something, but deeper inside the part that you can't see, there is in it also that the opposite of that. And that is because of the scholars of Atzmos. So I told you this minor is going to take us, to our limits. So once we bring Atzmos in, you know that it's going to be a fun experience. Let's leave this word Atzmos about how there is a scholars of Atzmos. It's not so hard to understand. It's just it's changing the language a little bit. And when you break up that particular thing that really has hidden in it anything, whatever given thing you take, and you break it down to separate details, and you find its opposite, that's when it could unite with its opposite. And then all those things that were separate now become included and comprised of each other and blended together, and they assist one another. Okay, so the mashal of the puzzle, basically, when you take a puzzle before it's divided up into pieces, right? I'm not going to get too deep because this goes back very deep before it's cut into pieces. So it's really one, right? But let's talk about the puzzle when it's cut, but you don't see the lines, you don't see the shapes of the pieces. You see one big, beautiful picture of somebody by a river fishing. There's a nice tree there, and a little log cabin, and some grass on the, that's all you see. What do you see? You see one picture. You see how everything is part of the same picture. There's no other parts here. That doesn't tell you the true oneness of the picture. What tells you the true oneness of the picture is if it could tolerate, if it could handle, if it could experience being totally separated and scattered and divided and changed around in such a way that there's no way there's no unity here. There's any unity here. There's no way this little piece that I'm picking up that has some markings on it, that doesn't show me anything about the picture at all. There's no way that that is part of this picture. And when you take it apart and you put it back together, oh, then you see, not only is this not disturbing the picture, the whole picture is able to be one picture because of this little piece that gives it its completeness. So that's the simple way of how I can explain this now. Now let's go to the statement. And that's what we see in Kedusha. Through bittul, we have is achtus v'skalos. Anything that's the same is not really the same, so it's the very opposite. In Kedusha, anything that's different, anything that looks completely disconnected and detached and separated from this other thing, really you have a way to bring out its oneness by showing that despite the fact that it may look this way, you could reveal that oneness. And that's your whole avodah. Your whole avodah is to take it from being, from looking like, from being in a state of disconnect and detachment, and you show, that's your input, you show how it comes together. And now it overcame adversity. It overcame, which means that it's stronger oneness. It could even be one, like I said, Tuesday versus Sunday. It could even be one when it appears to be different, and the oneness is what withstands. The oneness is what comes through, what dominates. That shows that it's really one. So, but the opposite is with Klippa. With Klippa is whatever is together is only circumstantial. It's not really one. And the minute it becomes apparent that its true colors come out, then what remains is the truth about it, which is that really it's an opposition. Maybe it was laying dormant for a while, but really this is what it's about. And so basically we're continuing further. Now we're getting a better understanding of Klippas Midyan. Modern dissent, dispute, argument, opposition, and baseless hatred. It means hatred in its purest or unpurest form. And there's one ingredient here that's in Klippa and not in Kedusha, which is Yeshus. That means as long as I'm independent, when you have a beautiful symphony and someone is playing a different tune, you have 100 pieces, and one person is playing a different tune because now he only knows about himself, he doesn't know how he fits with the rest of the symphony, he ruins everything. Why? Where does it come from? Because he doesn't see himself as a part of everybody else. He sees himself as an existence on himself. And that's basically Midyan. Sometimes there's a little bit of a discrepancy between one instrument and another instrument, and maybe he happened to like that note better in the tune, and he thought it's going to help the tune better, or that's why he suggested and he wants it to be that way, but he's still working for the same cause. But Midyan is not just that he happens to get into a little bit of a problem or a big problem because of a reason. Like the case of Moav, they were fighting for survival. They were afraid of the Yidden, so they fought the Yidden. Why did they fight? If the Yidden wouldn't be a threat to them, they wouldn't fight the Yidden. But Midyan was all about fighting the Yidden because they hate the Yidden. No other thing about it. It's just the thing itself. So, and therefore, what happens as a result of that? So he can't tolerate the Zulas, he can't tolerate the other person. So he looks at him in a negative way. And he hates him. And that's why he won't be happy and he won't share in the other person's joy. And he wouldn't feel bad for the person. He won't feel happy for the person when the person has something good happening to him. And he won't participate in the person's sorrow and troubles. He won't feel any pain because he will be happy as a result of that. Okay, now we have Midian being explained and brought out fully. Okay, now we have a problem. What's the problem? We don't have a problem, but the Rebbe Rashab has to connect something, and that's why I made this little merger sign. This is abstract art, so anything that doesn't look good is probably better than anything else. You just don't understand. Anyway, I made like this A shape, which means two things. We have to bridge a gap over here. What's the bridge? The bridge is that we're talking about the extreme enemies of a Yid, the extreme, horrible, debased people that did terrible and horrible things and can't stand Yidden in their guts. And now the Rebbe Rashad is talking to Chassidim. So what's going to be the bridge that connects, that links, that connects both of these ideas together? That the Rebbe Rashad is telling Chassidim that you should know this is a Midian behavior. So therefore the Rebbe Rashad is going to go into Sinas Chinam V'Evdei Hashem. Hang the Eisa Katayda, we're starting base now. Whether it's Eisa Katayda, in not only whether, it's found, this Sinas Chinam V'Evdei Hashem is found in while they're learning Torah. That's one form of V'Evdei Hashem. V'Hang B'Yonei Avodah. And also you can find this in Avodah. Avodah means a person working with himself. Serving Hashem in the way of learning Torah, or serving Hashem in the way of dealing with his becoming closer to Hashem, fixing his fault, his sins, and things that aren't appropriate. So in both of these things, you could see a divisiveness between one Yid and another. Isn't that amazing? So we're going to the other extreme case of Midian. What's the common thread? Mitzad HaYeshus. The Yeshus zu yichel liyas heim ba'avodah b'simcha. The Yosei Misha Oyev. And also, the hang, avoid the b'shitfus u'medidus. And also, when he's not in a mode of simcha, which serving Hashem, niftas Hashem is simcha because he sees how beautiful, how great the Eibishter is, as the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain, with all the greatness of Hashem and the creating Yesh Me'ayin, and there's so many ways to understand this and appreciate this, and yet. Even when he's in simcha mode and he's in love is like in sync, is part of the simcha group. So love and simcha means you see the greatness of Hashem and you feel so privileged and you feel so good and you feel so lucky and fortunate that you are able to be close to Hashem. That means you understand Abish's greatness and that brings out a joy, a love, a good feeling in you. There could be yesh is there because of something called yesh misha'ayev. As the Alter Rebbe discusses in Tanya. I feel good. I love this. That means your mitzias is in the picture, and that could exclude somebody else. Because as long as my mitzias is in the picture, even in a situation of loving Hashem, but there's a problem with that. That could also bring to a different expression, which is intolerance to another. And the meridus, and also when he's thinking and avoided the meridus part of it, when he has to go through and examine himself and see how low he is and how much he's lacking and how wrong he did so many wrong things and so many and the Rebbe Rashab says even in those things that are not Avedis, but even those things in tightness, heter, and things like that. So he's also, and he says like Shaul HaMelech, we saw that it was a jealousy to Dovid HaMelech. And the Kiva Shazel closing and says, and since all this is the same, the root of it is all the same. It's Midian, it's Yeshus. It's just that one expresses itself and rears its head in a very, very, very distinct and defined, ugly way, and the other one is subtle. Well, what's the difference? It's still stemming from the same klipa, which is enemy of Hashem. Lochein tzorech chipus, the bottom of the page, b'yoser gam b'dakas v'hel l'varzes l'gamrim ozel l'vater d'akei. That's why he needs to examine himself and to be very careful, which is what Chassidim are all about, to look deeply and find little subtleties that are signs of things that are extremely, extremely opposite of Kedusha, albeit in a way that it's subtly, that it's coming out in a subtle way. Okay, Gimel, we're going to turn up the speed a little bit. Says that Rebbe Rashab and Gimel, we're going to explain now. They have a problem. What's the problem? How is Klippa able to oppose Shem Havaya? How is Midian able to oppose Shem Havaya? Why not? Because Klippa is many, Klippa is pure, Havaya is one. Simple. So the Rebbe explains, Rebbe Shab explains, we have to first preface what is Achdus Hashem, Shem Havaya all about. Some of this I already touched on. Shem Elikim never Lashon Rabin. Elikim is plural. It doesn't say Elika. It says Elikim. Or Kael. It says Elikim. Gods. That's the literal translation. No one means the Eibush and the Eibush is one, but Elikim is Lashon Rabin. Why is it said in the plural form? Because it is what indicates what comes from it. And Elikim is the source of all the different creations, how they are different from each other. And they're very big, many divisions and separations. Because the highest it's the highest that comes into every creation, which is different than another highest, and that provides for the existence of creations that are different. Havaya is echad. Elikim is riboy. And you move on. However, so the minute you have something that's riboy, it's not in opposition to Elikim, it's in opposition to Havaya. However, we still have to understand that Mokadach is Ahavas Mishem Havaya Lashon Mahava. Kivishunim Shokay Shem Elikim. Uvehech Sheyesh Beyakov Brothers Yisrael Beizeh Shemit Down discuss Shekam Bahem. Yes, Ribi Protein is how Mishem Havaya Atz Misheyesh Beyishalkus Dal Leisis Tzimtzum Mispashtam Shacham Mispashtas. There's a problem here. Okay, Havaya is unity. Havaya is oneness. But the fact is that Havaya is the source of all the things that come from Elikim. It's the way Havaya goes into Elikim. And Elikim is able to give energy to all the different creations, all the various multiplicity that's out there. So we're back to square one. It's in there, it's in Havaya. It's got to be coming from Havaya because Elikim is a manifestation of Havaya through Elikim into the world. Ayod, they have to start to call in the drawing. Ube'emes, Havaya Elikim Kolochad. Achegam in the drawing, she was half my Shem Elikim, and Betachas Isachtas El Shem Elikim, Megalas is Halvish Behem, Win is Galas Riba Proton Shemahatz, she would such lameness nice Gamaribui. The Shem Havaya Megalas, a Yikud Shematz, Moshe Riba Proton, him Echod Mamish, Zo, a Yikud the Yochim. Okay, we already spoke about this, it's very simple. Havaya is the ingredient of oneness. Once you have the ingredient of oneness, then when you have variation, when you have multiplicity, you have that oneness in everything all the same. Just like take anything, we talk about a machine, and if the machine is all functioning for one purpose, a copy machine, which is all functioning for the sake that you put something on the glass and a copy comes out, then the little spring and the little screw and the little belt and the wheel and the roller, all these things suddenly prove and show that oneness that comes from the source of the designer, of the creator of this machine. So the same thing is here. Once you know Havaya's oneness, that is the oneness that goes throughout all the different multitudes. We still have to understand more. Now we're going to explain in this ice, just so I can summarize quickly. I can't read inside anymore because I ran out of time. But basically, what the Rebbe is going to show is that in the very, very beginning, in Atzmos itself, because that's where everything comes from, you see two opposites. You see Oir and you see Hedera Oir. So it has to be that Hedera Oir and Oir are really, really one. Because if you have Tzimtzum and then you have Gilui, so what just happened is, and from the Nakuda, which officially is only a Nakuda, that's what happened after the Tzimtzum. We only had like a little tiny dot. And then came the Kav, which is where that's what the Hay symbolizes, the Kav, which is already how you have Oilamais and Chayas, and it goes all the way down into different Oilamais. What you have to say is that really anything that is the opposite, as long as it's connected to its source and it's bottled to its source, is really one, because the oneness consists of opposites. Can't get into too deeper now, but V'inyan. And the Rebbe explains over here that, for instance, Chachma and Bina, Yesh Me'ayin. Let me just go to the end over here. V'yuvon, v'hak t'minyan esachas chaytish v'ayir. You talk about the unity between, the oneness between dark and light. Hel and Megillah b'shorish harishon, in its original root. Which is what I just said before. And then, so you have from the dark come the Gilui. How does the Gilui come from the dark? So there's something higher than that. That dark and light are the same exact. And there's no difference between the two. So in the Eibishter, before it comes out, before you see anything, in there it must be there, where you don't see it as a difference, you just see it as Atzmos. You don't see it as Choshech, you don't see it as Oid, but Oid and Choshech are there, and yet it's the most oneness that you can imagine, because it's before the Tzimtzum. The Hamshach, we're going to go. Hamshach is a Atzmi Dei Seif, Nifla Yichud Beis Eisius Yudkei Weidei Atoyno. How do we reveal this oneness of the Eibishter that contains within the oneness? The oneness is made up and is all about two opposites, because two opposites are not any less one than something that's not opposite. That's is expressed, that's brought down and revealed and brought into our lives. Torah's emes and the emes that's in everything could contain opposites, because Torah came before the world, and the world is already part of the different creations and variations and all that. And Torah can bring out the oneness in all the creations. It's not that Torah it is the oneness of Atzmos. Torah has in it and is about revealing the oneness of Atzmos. I just want to conclude by explaining that a lot of this is just very quickly finishing. I know I'm over time already. But by explaining that the whole idea of our job of Dira B'Tachtonim is to bring down Atzmos. Why does Atzmos have to be two opposites? What's wrong if Atzmos is not two opposites? So, in other words, you could say the Eibush is Ein Sof, which is really, in most places of Chassidus, it elaborates mostly on Ein Sof, on Bleakvul. Okay, Bleakvul means it has no boundaries. The problem with that is that in itself is a limitation. Because when you say it's Bleakvul, you can't say it's Gvul. Bleakvul cannot be Gvul. So then, how is there a possibility that the Eibishter is bli gvul and gvul at the same time? And the answer is atzmos. Atzmos is something beyond any conditions. Anything that may oppose something else, it's only how it looks after point of how it's expressed in whatever form possible. And take, for instance, the tree, right? You take a seed, right? And the seed is, just a second. And the seed is one seed, right? Break it open, you'll see the same thing. Break it down again, you'll see the same thing. Now, when it's in the seed, is it really one or not? So the seed is going to produce bark, it's going to produce roots, it's going to produce branches and leaves, and it's going to produce fruits. And the fruits are going to be consisting of peels and seeds that are in the fruits and the actual fruit that you eat. So what are you going to say now? You're going to say now that these all have their own separate sources? Of course not. You know it's coming from the seed. That's not Atzmos yet, though. Because deep down inside, Atzmos is that it's nothing that you could even use to trace. There's nothing there. It's something beyond anything, that it's in me, it is me. It is the existence of everything. It could be inside in a form of Islapshus, which is Gvul. It could be above and surrounding, encompassing, because it's too big to come in, but it's not too big to come in, and it's not too small to be encompassing. Because it is everything and anything and nothing at the same time. Once a Yid is connected to his root, which is Shem Havaya, which is the expression of oneness in anything, which means it has the characteristics of Atzmos. It's the way that Atzmos comes down through Torah. It's not possible for a Yid to have any differences with another Yid. And the only way that is because there's a little poison inside, which is called Yeshus. And this Yeshus could be in the holiest and the nicest and the best. And that's why we have to look to this, because the antidote to Yeshus is Bittul. And in Bittul, you don't have those problems, because even if you're serving the Shem and you have Ahava, but you always feel, I'm nothing. Even when you have Meridas, and Meridas sometimes is very self-serving. Self-pity is a Geshmaka thing. When you sit down and think about things that bother you, and you justify yourself, even if it's about things that you did wrong and you're bad, sometimes you like putting yourself down because you're the one doing it. So you feel that it's something that makes you feel that you are something. Only way you could have it, all this avoidance, and not be, God forbid, affected by it in the wrong way, is with Bittul. So when the Rebbe Rashab saw that there's any kind of differences between Yidden, that automatically has to mean Midyan. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry about the overtime. And the Ikid is, the Rebbe is the Yechida HaKlolis. Every person has the Yechida Shebenefesh. In the Yechida Shebenefesh, the way that we are able to conquer any kind of opposition or any kind of differences within us is not because we're stronger. The Nefesh Likis is stronger, and you have a bigger Gilei Likus, and you focus more on your Nefesh Likis more, so is able to overwhelm the Nefesh Ahavas. The Gilei Yechid in a person brings out how the Nefesh Ahavas and the Nefesh Likis are on the same team, and they're both really one. And that's really what it's about. Chaim L'Vracha, Sheikh now.